When you think about China's Three Kingdoms period, you probably picture these legendary warriors in these epic one-on-one duels. And one of those big names is Xu Huang, a top general for the warlord Cao Cao. But what if I told you that the popular image we have of him, this axe-wielding powerhouse, is almost completely made up? Today we're going to peel back the layers of the myth to find the real man behind the legend.
So on one side, you've got the myth from pop culture, a total martial arts master famous for his gigantic battle axe. But then you look at the actual historical record, and you find a quiet, completely incorruptible, and incredibly methodical professional soldier. How on earth does one guy end up with two legacies that are so wildly different?
Well, that myth comes almost entirely from one source, the famous novel Romance of the Three Kingdoms. See, the book needed these larger-than-life heroes and villains to make the story pop, so it turned Xu Huang into this pure warrior, someone who could go toe-to-toe with legends like Guan Yu and fight them to a standstill. And that's the image that's really stuck with us for centuries.
But the real Xu Huang, the guy his boss, Cao Cao, actually knew and respected, he was valued for a completely different set of skills. These weren't the traits of some reckless brawler. They were the virtues of a perfect professional soldier, something that was incredibly rare in such a chaotic time.
Okay, so let's break down his real character. First off, that unwavering discipline was his absolute trademark. Get this, after a big victory, while other armies would just scatter to go loot and plunder, his troops would stay in perfect, silent formation. He was also really humble, never chasing personal power or bragging about his wins. And his loyalty? It was to the state first and foremost. This was a general who would much rather outthink you than outfight you. And this one quote from Cao Cao, it tells you everything you need to know about that respect. Zhou Yafu was this legendary general from the earlier Han dynasty, basically the gold standard for military discipline and conduct. For a history buff like Cao Cao, this was the highest praise imaginable. It was like him saying, you are the perfect soldier. In fact, you could say his whole career was built on just making smart calls. Early on, an advisor named Man Chong basically told him, look, your current boss is going nowhere, but this Cao Cao guy, he's the future. Xu Huang saw the logic, he made the switch, and he never looked back. That move showed incredible strategic thinking before he'd even won a single major battle for his new lord.
So, how did this quiet, disciplined personality actually translate to the battlefield? Well, his career became a masterclass in winning with careful planning and brilliant logistics, not the kind of wild, reckless charges you see in the stories. Here are two perfect examples from early on. During the massive Battle of Guandu, he wasn't in the main brawl. Nope. He was leading a surgical strike on the enemy's supply lines, burning thousands of their grain carts. He knew that an army starves long before it's beaten. A few years later, instead of a bloody, drawn-out siege, he just shot an arrow with a letter over the city walls, calmly explaining why resistance was futile. The city surrendered without a single casualty. That's pure strategy.
But don't get me wrong, he could also be incredibly bold when his methodical mind spotted an opening. In 211, Cao Cao's entire army was just stuck. They were pinned down at the Wei River by Ma Chao's terrifying cavalry. They were completely and utterly paralyzed.
To break this deadlock, Xu Huang cooks up this high-risk, high-reward plan. He suggests taking an elite force, marching way upriver, crossing in secret, and then building a fortified camp deep behind enemy lines. It was an absolutely brilliant flanking maneuver that forced the enemy to divide their army, breaking the stalemate and letting Cao Cao sweep in for the win.
And all of this, everything we've talked about, it leads us to the absolute pinnacle of his career. This is the moment that cemented his name in history, the Battle of Fancheng, a showdown against one of the most legendary figures of the entire era.
I mean, the stakes just could not have been higher. The god of war himself, Guan Yu, was at the absolute peak of his power. He trapped a key general, wiped out 2 relief armies sent to stop him, and his reputation was so terrifying that Cao Cao was seriously thinking about abandoning the capital city. The kingdom of Wei was on the brink of collapse. And who do they send to fix this mess? Xu Huang.
So what does he do when he gets there? Does he charge right in? Not a chance. He shows up with an army of green recruits and starts digging. He patiently, methodically builds trenches and fortifications, slowly inching his way forward, cutting off Guan Yu's supply lines one by one. He flat out refused to fight until he knew, for a fact, that he could not lose. And right in the middle of all this tactical maneuvering, this famous moment happens. See, Xu Huang and Guan Yu were actually old friends.
They met up between their armies and just chatted for a bit, catching up like old times. But then, Xu Huang turned away from his friend.
And he announced a massive reward for anyone who brought him Guan Yu's head. Guan Yu was, of course, shocked and asked him what he was doing. Xu Huang's reply basically defined his entire life. This is a public matter. His duty to the state came before anything and everything, even friendship. For him, loyalty was absolute.
And from that position of absolute strength, Xu Huang finally launched his attack. It didn't just break the siege. It completely shattered Guan Yu's army and sent the legend himself reeling. This one victory led directly to Guan Yu's capture and death, and it changed the entire course of the war.
So, just as the novel fictionalized his life, it also completely fictionalized his death. It gave him this dramatic warrior's end that, well, he never actually had.
In the novel, he's shot in the head with an arrow in the heat of battle. The reality? It was much more fitting for the man he truly was. After a long, decorated career, he won one last offensive battle, and then he died peacefully of illness in 227 CE, a respected veteran right to the very end.
After his death, he was given the posthumous title Marquis Zhuang. And that word Zhuang, it means robust or stout, a perfect reflection of his legacy as this strong, reliable, unshakable pillar of the state he served so faithfully his whole life.
So all of this leaves us with a final thought. We remember the thrilling myth, right? The axe-wielding warrior. But the history reveals a man whose discipline, integrity, and strategic brilliance were, you could argue, far more impressive. It really makes you wonder which is more powerful in the long run, the excitement of a legendary story or the quiet, solid impact of a disciplined life.